So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to welcome you all. Get ready to receive another dose of wisdom in the form of advice. These are things I wish I'd heard myself when I was just starting out in music. Let's get started. First tip: don't touch the compressor, equalizer, or saturator until you've sorted out the instrumental balance and panning. Break your back if you have to, but make sure that just by balance, volume, and panning alone, your mix sounds close to your reference track. Already pretty decent. Then it'll be much easier for you to make the right decisions. But when it comes to EQ, compression, and saturation, you won't miss the mark as much. Tip number two: try using sidechain, not just from the kick to the bass, but also from the kick a little bit to the vocals, pads, and melodies to lock them into the groove of that kick within the mix. In other words, don't forget that you can punch through there as well, with spectral sidechain from the vocals to the melody group, and also sends with spatial effects. So sidechain isn't just about the kick and the bass. Don't mix without references. Mixing without references often ends up with you going completely off track. The worse you are at mixing, the sooner you should start looking at references. A beginner should sober up their ears, ideally not even at the mixing stage, but already during the arrangement stage. A lot of fans of everything natural and original will tell you, trust your ears. But everyone's ears, how should I put this gently? Everyone's ears are different, even when you have experience. In one case, you have some idea of what's normal in one genre, but in another genre, you don't. So without a reference, it gets tough. That's why you shouldn't be lazy. Pick out about 10 benchmark tracks in the genre you're working in. And tip number four: if you haven't had any kind of structured training in this field, whether that's private lessons with a sound engineer or at least a couple of them, or courses that have structure and logic, then don't even bother looking at expensive equipment. It just won't help you. You won't even get 10% of its full potential out of it. It's basically like throwing money into a fire. I remember a while back, a student came to me who, believe it or not, had set up a room in his country house. And not like most people do, just hanging up some mineral wool panels. He had it custom made. They built a room within a room with the right geometry, set it up so that all the modes would be broken up properly. So in the walls, there were Augsburgers, midfield monitors. I think there was a Micromain 27, Barefoot, Nearfield Genelix, three-way from the series with the one at the end. In other words, the setup was just mind-blowing, like a dream come true for just about anyone. The request went something like this: I've put together a little studio for myself here. Seems decent, but somehow things still aren't working out. He sends me his tracks, and the balances, the dynamics, the conflicts, everything is just a mess. Honestly, the level is worse than what I could probably mix on AirPods. So I ask, did you study with anyone? He says, well, I watched different videos on YouTube. So without proper training, don't rush into buying expensive equipment. People often DM me listing all their gear and then ask, can I make a hit with this? Honestly, it really doesn't matter what equipment you have or how much, how many mixes you've done in your life, who you studied with, or what courses you took. Have you ever wondered why renting a super high-end studio costs at most about $200 an hour, but someone like Michael Brower charges $5,000 an hour for his work? So, if you take someone who's learning in an unstructured way and they've got barefoots, ATCs, and then you put them up against someone like Dave and Sato with just a pair of earbuds, I think it's pretty obvious who's going to win that battle. That's why the most important thing is knowledge and experience. Tip number five, friends: never mix for free. In this segment of the music market, where people ask you to mix for free, the source material is usually terrible. Don't get your ears used to that kind of junk that comes from people who aren't willing to invest in their sound. Aim for the mid tier right away, and then move up to the high end as you gain experience. Don't even practice on that stuff, no matter how much you want to or how little experience you have. Don't practice on that kind of material. The Spartan logic just doesn't work here, unfortunately. Just because you learn to mix bad source material well doesn't mean you'll be great at mixing good material. You'll just get used to crap. And all the gravitational pull of your reference habits will drag your great source material down to the level of the bad stuff you practiced on for so long, the ones you spent so much time training on. So when it comes to this, let's immediately toss out all those macho quotes like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or first you have to work with bad material, then with good. That's all a scam. If things really work that way, then all the top sound engineers would be from third world countries where people record on their phone's voice memo app. I think that's clear enough. Tip number six: instead of cutting the low frequencies on the kick drum, try shortening its tail. Very often, the kick drum doesn't sound tight enough. It's not because of the frequency response, but because of the envelope, which doesn't match the groove of the rest of the track. Just a quick little nuance, a tip. And number 7, if when you're balancing your instrumental mix, you end up chasing the faders, like you turn down the snare, then the kick stands out, so you turn down the kick, and then the hi-hat pops out. You turn down the hi-hat, and then the snare stands out again, and it just keeps going. The situation loops endlessly until you end up pulling all the faders down to complete silence. In this case, the problem is probably not with the instrumental balance, but with the transients. Either there's not enough saturation, or the problem is the lack of frequency bridges that glue these instruments together in the tonal balance. Back when I was learning mixing about 12 years ago, my teacher gave me this exercise. It was an exaggerated, almost impossible to mix track made up of just two instruments. There was only a dull kick and a very sharp attacking hi-hat. It's really hard to balance such a combination because, first of all, there are no mid range instruments between them to glue them together in the spectrum into something cohesive. Since about 50% of the hi hat sound is not the body itself, but the transient, I ended up balancing mostly the hi hat's transient against the non attacking kick. Naturally, nothing worked out. Because of these two reasons, I kept having to chase the faders down in volume, all the way to complete silence. So the solution was either to boost the transient on the kick or to cut the transient on the hi-hat. You could also add some saturation to the mid-range of the kick just to get at least some kind of glue. In this spectrum, elements would form that will tie them together. Eighth tip. To make EQing easier, mentally divide EQ into 4 parts. My purpose. The first purpose is to remove muddiness and resonances. The second is to separate it from a conflicting instrument. The third is to shape the tone. And the fourth is to fit the instrument into the mix. And for each reason, you can actually use a separate equalizer to solve the specific task you need from scratch. Visually, this will be more convenient for you. Later, you can do it all in a single equalizer. Tip number 9. Create a convenient template for yourself where the channels are already named, equalizers are set up, and sidechains from the kick to the bass are already routed. And there, on other instruments, where sends are already sent to reverb, where analyzers are hanging on the master, the same reference to from mastering the mix, they're real fonts if you mix on headphones. This will make your work much easier. Tip number 2. Record the peculiarities of your perception and work with it. All of us have different frequency response curves in our heads, which can be corrected by either real fonts, Sonarworks, or even $1 million studio. Everyone also has different listening habits. For example, I just can't help but crank up the bass way above any reasonable level. And at the same time, I tend to mute the upper mids, even if they're not harsh or piercing. And I know this about myself. When my hands reach out, it's always to sneakily crank things up a bit more, like boosting the bass or cutting at 5 kilohertz too. Instead of doing that, first I go and compare with the reference track. And in 90% of cases, it turns out my bass is already at the reference level. And the upper mids are fine too. There's no need to cut at 5 kilohertz. Some people like vocals that really stick out. Some like the highs cranked up so much that sparks are practically flying out of the mix. Some people love density, that super compressed sound. Some folks have their own kind of skewed tonal balance in their heads. Just always keep your own weak spots in mind. Some personal preferences that statistically deviate a lot from reference tracks. And keep that in mind when you make any decision. And let me know in the comments what your personal quirks are in mixing, where you most often miss the mark. I hope this video turned out to be extremely useful for you. See you next time, friends. All the best to you.